Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.
Hey, it's Matt from the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur here. Thanks again for listening to the DTVC podcast. Before we jump in, I wanted to quickly let you know that my new novel, A Girl and a Gun, is available on Amazon now, both on Kindle and paperback. It follows Justin, a successful writer whose past as a scriptwriter for a fetish porn site comes back to haunt him and threatens to derail his career. As he's picking up the pieces, he gets an opportunity to make a movie called A Girl and a Gun with a rom-com star. Justin may have bitten off more than he can chew, though, because she's notoriously difficult to work with. If you're interested, you can find the link on our webpage, along with the link to my first novel, Chad in Accounting. If you have any questions, please reach out, and I thank you for the support. Now, on to the podcast. Everyone, welcome back to the Direct Video Connoisseur podcast. As always, it's Matt here, and I am joined once again by special guest Rich Hawes from the DTV Digest. Welcome back, Rich.
Thank you for having me back again.
Excellent, yeah. And I was saying, I think before we started that I remember at some point I think you had reached out to me, and I think even Ty and Brett had come up to see if we had seen the movie that we're going to be talking about today, Shadow Fury. And so then I think when we were looking at topics that this one just kind of came to mind as a good one for us.
Yeah, and I think the last time we spoke, we were talking about the Total Force and Absolute Force movies, if I recall correctly. And correct me if I'm wrong there. Did we cover those?
Exactly. So those were the
yeah.
covered. Yep. For the
and there's a sort of a tangential connection there because of Timothy Bottoms was the star of those movies, and during that conversation, I possibly referred to Shadow Fury as well because of this movie actually starring his brother Sam.
Yeah, because I think we were talking about that. We were trying to figure out. I think it was either this movie or there's another one too that I think we may have confused the two, and then we discovered that Sam Bottoms actually passed away, and he's no longer with us. And I think that's when we were talking about it. And then it was like, oh yeah, he was in Shadow Fury, and I think that might be even what the picture is that they use. Or one of the ones on his page is of him in this movie.
Yeah, this was a few years. This one was 2002, and he passed away in 2008. I think he did a fair amount of work between those periods, but yeah, this is certainly the one for me, as far as I'm concerned, of his movies. I mean, go into his performance and stuff in a bit, but I like, you know. My cards are on the table completely that this is one of my favorite movies. So I'm really looking forward to us having this conversation.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's going to be good. I think it'll be good to get excited. This was one that I think, I don't know if pleasantly surprised was the right way to describe how I felt about it, but I think this is definitely one that I think there's a lot to it that I think, as we discuss it some, that I think for people out there that like B action movies, this one has a lot of pieces to it that I think the average B action movie fan can really sink their teeth into.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can approach it from a number of different viewpoints. This is a very Hong Kong influenced, or Asian influenced kind of action movie. So it's coming out of that tradition of American style movies that have that fast-paced sort of wire work kind of action going on. Drive was one of the sort of I wouldn't say it was a hit, but it was very influential at the time. And then Rush Hour was around the same time, so you got these East meets West kind of team ups kind of happening throughout from the sort of mid 90s onward. And this is one of the sort of the later ones in that kind of storyline. But I think just the way it's put together and the concept and everything it's a lot of stuff we've seen before, but it's very playfully done, and there's lots of little interesting things about it, including appearances by popular recognizable actors that we've people are fans of, that we'll get into. And the film itself has action that is kind of in the same sense as Drive and films like that, and films of Isaac Florentine. It's just a cut above what you would necessarily expect. I mean, this could have been something like a Total Force or an Absolute Force, but they've gone that extra mile. And even though they're working on a really low budget, they've managed to create stuff that's really visually interesting.
Yeah, and speaking too of the visuals, one thing that stands out for me a little bit with this is that we're into 2001, 2002 here, and this is kind of the end of an era for direct-to-video, in the sense that this is a film that's shot on film. It's not digitally created. And I'm not poo-pooing the idea of, or I'm not saying it's bad if a movie shot on digital, because I understand, one, from a cost standpoint, it's really important. But there's that look of a film that's shot on film that I don't know, it gives it a different vibe that I think this movie definitely, benefited from that. I think if this had been made in, instead of 2001 and in 2011, it would have been a different movie.
Yeah, because comparing it to something made now, so Hard Kill with one of the Bruce Willis, movies really comes to mind, in that that's got really sort of bland, kind of uninteresting, industrial kind of warehouse locations, basically, which are quite common in the action genre for that. And this is a perfect example of that kind of thing. It's all shot in like back alleys and nondescript areas. It's kind of it's set in a future where there's this like a cloning organization that's this is like high end scientists, and they're supposed to be cloning chickens, and they'd get up to all sorts of other stuff. So they're basically a high end outfit. But the way the sets are and everything in the movie, it looks like they're back alley scientists or something, because there's literally no production design really to the film in that sense. You don't get. Remember in the 90s, we always there was that water treatment plant or whatever that was always used as the futuristic building where all the scientists would be, and you would see it in pretty much Biodome. The Pauly Shore movie used it as well, and it was just this really distinctive building that sort of just said futuristic, and that would have been the kind of setting that this movie should have had for some of those scenes, but they just didn't have the money, clearly. And so it's all shot in very worn down buildings and stuff. But I think the film, there's so much going on in the film that for me, it's not really something that I linger too much on or think about. I mean, it's set in the future, but there's no like big establishing shots of futuristic vehicles or anything. It's literally nothing. It's almost like a 5 minutes in the future, because everything looks basically exactly the same as normal, but it's a world where clones exist and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to describe it, is that sort of 5 minutes in the future sense, where because there really isn't anything that's done, like there's no fancy technology beyond the cloning part. I think there's one, like a tracking device that they use at one point that I guess would maybe hint at that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no like video phones or
there's none of that. I mean, that was all really common at the time. There would be a disc or something. There's no mention of. I think there might be one or two shots of a computer.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
Yeah, and the computers that they had definitely looked like something, maybe not even from the age. They looked older. They looked like they could have been from a previous, from 5 or 6 years before. So even in that sense, we're not really even getting anything. I'm trying to think. I think the main character, or the female lead, Alexandra Camp.
Alexandra Camp. Yep.
Yeah, I think she's on an iBook or an iMac at one point, or a portable Mac, and so.
Oh yeah, and the lead scientist, the one she's working for, he's got an Apple MacBook or whatever.
Yeah, I think that for itself, that would have been, for that time, that would have been, on the one hand, say that would have been expensive, but on the other hand, you almost think, I think even at that time, Apple was ahead of the game in terms of, using computers to do, video editing and things like that. It's possible that would have been, one that maybe somebody owned on the crew, somebody who was making the film that included that in there, because that one that definitely stood out for me. Like, usually when you see laptops in these movies, they're these big bulky things, and I mean that would have been bulkier than like a MacBook Air, but it definitely looked higher end for that period.
Yeah, and going back to sort of the fact that it's not showing you all this stuff, and it's got that particular kind of filmy look to it and different aspects of it. It's kind of a film that it looks like it's from a different period. It doesn't really look like a post 2000 movie to me. Even when it came out, it felt like something older. I think it's just in terms of the look and the style and the conventions and all the facets of it, and that kind of over time that has actually given it for me a more timeless feel. So it's not really a film that fits in. It doesn't look like Drive. It doesn't look like Rush Hour. It doesn't look like one of the more recent VOD movies or anything. It's kind of got its own distinct identity, even from other films that the director is Makoto Yokoyama, and he did another film after it or around the same time called Extreme Heist, also called I can't remember, Wicked Game, which never got released in my country. I got an imported tape of it. It's got the same kind of budget sort of look as this, and some of the same sorts of things going on, but it's not at all as memorable a kind of movie. This one is kind of, for me, it just feels like a lightning in a bottle movie. It might not be perfect, might not be everyone's cup of tea, but for me, it's like I get more out of it every time I watch it.
Yeah, and that actually kind of, maybe as we start talking about the film, I think that is one thing I think about this movie that I think it does have that feel of, on repeated viewings, it can sort of, there can be more to it. But yeah, why don't we? I'll kind of get in. I'll kind of get on the plot a little bit here. And the other thing too is I think I may have missed some pieces of the plot. So if I've got anything wrong, let me know, because I may have misunderstood some of it. But the basic idea is that you've got this company called NovaCorp, who they're working on cloning technology, and among their scientists, there's a renegade scientist played by Pat Morita, and that renegade scientist, he has cloned a warrior, or a killer. I guess you could even say a ninja. I think they refer to him as a ninja in the movie. Name of Takeru, played by Masakatsu Funaki. And the idea is that Morita is sending this killer out to kill his fellow scientists, which include Alexander Camp, who we'll talk about later. And then I think, who was the main bad guy? Was it Alan Coleman? Was that?
Yes, Dr. Hiller.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so the idea is that in order to protect themselves, these doctors hire a mercenary or bounty hunter, played by Sam Bottoms, Mitchell Madsen. And the story behind him is that now this is the piece that I was a little bit confused about. He's not able to get a liver transplant because of his blood type, I think. Is that what it was?
I don't know.
I couldn't figure it out either, because he was supposed to. He was on an organ donor list, and so my understanding, at least in the United States, when it comes to being an organ donor, because I know this from a experience. One of my dad's friends, he had cirrhosis of the liver, and he wouldn't stop drinking. He just he kind of made it clear that he wasn't going to stop drinking, and so they don't give liver transplants to people who don't stop drinking.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it didn't seem like that mattered for his character. It seemed like he had to demonstrate that he was going to stop drinking because he just kept drinking, even despite that. But he did have a certain set of skills that would be required to sort of maybe, take out. I think they also were hiring him to take out Pat Morita, and possibly take out Takeru. When he goes, and this is, I think, what you were talking about too in terms of the locations. I think I was a little bit surprised when we go to where we think Pat Morita's lab is and his location. It definitely seems a little out of the way, and I think that was maybe my initial confusion piece, because it's almost like Sam Bottoms' character, Mitchell Madsen, he gets there very easily. This happens at the very beginning of the movie. He goes and takes out Pat Morita pretty quickly, but then he has his first encounter with Takeru there.
Yeah, and it's quite apparent that he's far outclassed, basically. And what we've got here is the movie. The movie is basically set up as a futuristic cowboy versus samurai kind of story. And although they refer to him as a ninja, so it's kind of a samurai / ninja kind of thing that they're going for, but they've set it in the future, which I think works nicely. Masa Funaki is excellent, as presenting that kind of stoic, trained killer kind of thing. And obviously we've got the element of that he's a clone and things like and that whole thing. And Sam Bottoms is kind of the world weary gunslinger, and he's sort of I think he's not playing it as an action star. It is an action movie, and he is the main character in it. But he's not that good in the action scenes. If you see what I mean, obviously, there's no way that he could actually defeat or even stand a chance against Takeru. But they kind of try and make it seem like that he's not completely outclassed or whatever by him somehow managing to sort of get out of things or get the upper hand, because Takeru can just deflect bullets and basically with his sword, and that's all that Mitchell Madsen's got apart from his attitude. And so it's quite a weird setup. And yeah, he's initially they have that initial encounter, and they become that's establishing the both the mission and sort of his growing personal animosity, and his not wanting to be him wanting to take this guy down, basically. And because that's just the way he does it. He's got the mission and he's going to get it done. And he doesn't like, because he's got this past that they go into where things didn't work out or whatever, and he's a guy who doesn't tolerate failure, even if he's dying. He's just going to keep coming and do what he can.
Yeah, thinking of him in that mold of like sort of the aging gunslinger character. I felt like there was one that came to mind. It was Bronson in Once Upon a Time in the West. That one kind of came to mind. Also, even kind of going further back, I'm thinking of High Noon, where you've got Gary Cooper's character in this setting where it's a little bit different in the sense that High Noon, it was like they didn't want him as the sheriff taking out the bad guys because they had this idea that they're gonna commercialize the town, and a gun shootout would be bad, and he ends up having to take them out by himself anyway. And there's that sense, right, of the person being like kind of, like you said, maybe outclassed, right? Like that the future is sort of there, and he's not, he hasn't caught up with it with his old ways. But the other piece,
well, that's a very traditional kind of. Again, we've seen that loads of time. I mean, Soldier with Kurt Russell, which is a bit like this because Takeru is a variation on the same character, but that or the same sort of storyline, sort of character story that Kurt Russell's character Todd had in that film. He's this train killer trying to sort of discover his emotions and things, and then he's got to go up against the new breed kind of thing, and that's what they do with this. They've got the new breed of fighter, which comes along later. But RoboCop 3 did it. So many of the so many of these kind of movies have done, or Universal Soldier and stuff. They've all done the old version versus the new and improved, and can the old beat the new? And usually, that's the way the story usually plays out, is that the fact that something's new and fantastic doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to defeat the experienced fighter or whatever. So so that's kind of the setup here. And you mentioned Charles Bronson. I was just going to linger on that for a second, because one of the things that I find interesting about this film is that if you look at, Takeru Masakatsu Funaki, to me, he's got that Sho Kosugi kind of look to if this feels like it could have been Ninja 4, for example.
Yeah.
And because of that sort of canon thing, it's almost like this movie could have been Sho Kosugi and Charles Bronson, or Sho Kosugi and Chuck Norris, if it was made in the 1980s. And I think, although Sam Bottoms is just, unfortunately, he's not in the same league as either of those guys. Funaki is just, I think, perfect as as a sort of a stand-in for a Sho Kosugi. Imagine like Sho Kosugi in Blind Fury, or one of his leading roles. This could have been, if this had a bigger budget, they'd have probably gotten like Jason Scott Lee, or someone, because there's the Bruce Lee kind of stuff they throw in there as well, with Takeru's shirt ripping off and stuff. They trying to, and again, he kind of represents all those guys. I think that's what's so great. And Funaki's I believe he's like a mixed martial arts fighter, is what his profession was. He's not an actor. He's done a few acting roles, but they brought him in from that world. So that's why he's got such a striking sort of physical presence in the movie. And so I just think it's interesting that it's this is like a post-canon movie. It's not like a new, we've seen New Image movies that have that sort of canon sort of feel to them and stuff, but I think this, even more so than any of those, it's just kind of just imagine what could have been if this was in the 80s and they'd had a bit more of a bigger budget and Sam Furstenberg was directing or something.
Yeah, I know, it's a really amazing way to think of it. This movie feels kind of like post that, right? It feels post canon, it feels post PM, it feels like post an error, when we think of like the 80s and 90s. And very different, in a different way than like what we were talking about last time. We were talking about Absolute Force and Total Force, where those kind of felt like kind of the end of something, but they also felt like very lower budget, and they felt kind of more like kind of a a fun time that you're having. Whereas this felt like it's like there aren't many movies beyond this point that really felt like they could fit in the 80s and 90s era that we think of as maybe that kind of like the real heyday of DTV action. And I think that's the thing about this one, is that it like you said, one, it feels timeless in the sense that like, it doesn't feel like it exists in any specific time from a story standpoint. But I think, how it was shot on film, there's some elements of it that make it more modern, because they kind of bite on the Matrix and a few things like that. But overall, it I think from an action standpoint, this definitely had that feel of like an era was ending, part of the end of an era, from what we were used to in the 90s.
Yeah, and even the sort of, the wire work stuff that they brought in there, which was a sort of probably would have been spurred on by the Matrix, but was more sort of in keeping with the sort of Hong Kong aesthetic that they were trying to go for. And that, I think, even that was kind of Peter, this was not the wire work kind of thing didn't really stick around very long. So not many films after the early 2000s have really done it. So we see a lot of very good, martial arts movies, features and shorts that are very physical and athletic, but not with the kind of and some with really good falls and stuff as well. But this one's got like, lots and lots of flipping and turning and really exaggerated kind of stuff that say is more recognized in, say, Isaac Florentine's films, for example. But this is kind of I would say even more exaggerated. Like somebody gets thrown off a roof and they're literally like spinning all the way off the roof, or they drop by a massive. There's like a couple of points in the film where they drop or jump on like a massive wire, and those are kind of big stunts that you don't generally see very often. And yet, unfortunately, because of the budget and that, you do, even though they may get rid of the wires, hide the wires, you can see the effects, like clothes are being sort of pulled up, so you can tell where they've done it, but it doesn't ruin the impact of what is a great stunt of somebody literally jumping from the top of a building and coming down, and they don't have there's no CGI and stuff involved apart from maybe removing some wires. And I think that you wouldn't see that in any film now. I mean, this film doesn't have any car chase or whatever, but the any sort of explosions, car chases and stuff are very limited in any low budget action film that we see these days. And this one gives us lots of fight action, including, say, all the very interesting and sort of crazy wire work, and these big jumps, and got some explosions and stuff in there. So although they're working with not, it's a very low budget film, and it's got, as we've sort of already talked about, the sort of locations and stuff, and there's not like big crowds of people, there's not loads of extras or anything, but they've used what money they had to really put the action on screen and to tell the story that they're trying to tell within those constraints, which again is something I really appreciate, and invest some money in performers like Pat Morita to come in and just sort of be basically day players and just add that little bit of value. I think Pat Morita it's a film full of mad scientists, but Pat Morita is the first one. He's the main sort of mad scientist character, and he's called Dr. O, and he's got the wild hair and stuff, and he's really sort of hamming out, and he does a couple of jokes and stuff as well, because obviously Morita has that background in comedy and stuff, so he brings something really interesting to those early scenes. And that's why I like one of the things I like about the movie is we keep spending time with these different interesting characters. These performers kind of come in and out of the movie while we're following the journey with Madsen and Takeru, whose stories kind of we cut between the two of them, and they're kind of, it's that whole two sides of the same coin, and we're following their journey, and are they so different, and all that sort of stuff. And as we're following them, they're interacting with different characters, and essentially having their own following the same story from different perspectives. So they both meet women and talk about, and get in touch with their feelings and whatnot. But then we've got these characters like Pat Morita, and the great Fred Williamson turns up for a couple of scenes as well.
Yeah. Now, a couple of things that interesting that you mentioned that I think I was going to maybe bring up as sort of connections here with the director that might be good to mention as we're here.
Yes.
So Makoto Yokoyama, obviously he did stunt work. Interesting. You mentioned Isaac Florentine, and I think I agree that this movie did have a kind of a Isaac Florentine feel, especially from that time period. I think of a movie like Bridge of Dragons that he did, or Savat. No, did he do Savat? He didn't do. Am I right? Did he? I think. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He did.
Yeah,
do
he did.
Savat.
Well, the same guy who did the stunt coordinator on this film, Tetsuo Kolkei, I believe he worked on Bridge of Dragons, I believe, or Makoto Yokoyama did. One of those guys did, and they've got they have that, and High Voltage, I think, as well. They've got that history. They've all worked Alpha Stunts, the kind of stuff, coming out of Drive, and there's all that DNA in there. Yeah. What was the other thing you were going to mention about?
Well, because then also, Drive is one connection, right? That they did stunts on Drive. The Power Rangers connection.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
all goes back to Power Rangers.
Right,
Everything
exactly.
leads back there.
Right. But it is interesting how when you take the suits away, right, from Power Rangers and you kind of make it more, I don't know if adult is the right term, because it sounds weird, right, when you say making it more adult. It sounds like you're talking like the X-rated section of the video store when you're saying that. But you can see like what these guys could all do, and I think the Isaac Florentine piece is a good one, because I think these guys are coming from a similar tradition, but I think they kind of weave in some of these elements. I think the Pat Morita piece is a great point, because looking at the Bulletproof review that they did, Chris the Brain did for this, one of the complaints he had was that it didn't have enough Pat Morita, and that's always a tough thing, right? Because how long do they have Pat Morita to shoot for? That when you get someone like a Pat Morita and you only get him for like a day or something, he's going to be so good in those like small scenes that he's in. You don't know if maybe like it would have been interesting if he had maybe done some voice work or something, where like we could have maybe had we could have maybe had our main character Takeru perhaps like talking to him or something, like like you could see like visions of him or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a great touch to the film to have Pat Morita there at the beginning like that, interacting with him. Before Sam Bottoms goes to take down Pat Morita, he is hanging out at a bar that Fred Williamson owns, and of course this doubles as a weapon shop. And in the back room, Fred Williamson is helping him buy weapons. Same thing with Fred Williamson. Fred Williamson, if he's going to be in a movie, if he's not going to be the star, then he's got to be some kind of smaller character that just is cool and doesn't get into trouble, doesn't get attacked or killed. He's got to because that's kind of his thing, right? He's got to, if he's the hero, he's got to get the girl, he's got to win in the end, all of that kind of thing. So in a movie like this, he's kind of just playing it quick and having some nice one-liners and things like that. But
he's super cool in this.
Yeah,
of course he is. He's Fred Williamson. He's super cool in everything.
Exactly. And so it's nice, it's nice to kind of see those touches, I think, like you said, in a movie like this. In this,
just interject there. In this movie, Fred Williamson is basically Q from the James Bond series. Right. If Q was an arms dealer. So I like that. I like that sort of.
Yeah, and because what happens is, right, so I guess I think I'm hoping I get the plot right from here. So the confrontation happens, Pat Morita is killed, and Sam Bottoms feels like, okay, I've done what I needed to do, I'm going to collect here. But then he's told by the scientists, I guess, right, that the clone that Pat Morita created, Takeru, is a match for a donor. So if he can take Takeru down, he would be able to get his liver and live, I guess. And so that kind of brings him back into the fray. But at the same time, we find out that this cloned killer is his brain, just because Pat Morita is dead doesn't mean that he's no longer going to take down the rest of the scientists. And so he's still going after them. He ends up killing another one who Sam Bottoms tries to protect him. He fails, and that one gets killed. And that's when he realizes he's got to go after Alexander Camp, the second to last of the scientists.
Yeah, so he's so this is where the sort of personal motivation comes in with Madsen. Is he's basically he needs a liver, and the liver stuff is just hilarious. The liver theme throughout the movie as it progresses, it just makes some of it's unintentionally hilarious, but it's so strong. I think it's kind of. I was thinking about this earlier. I think it's kind of a throwback because there's a heroic bloodshed kind of element to this movie, especially as you get to the end. And I was thinking they're going for kind of a John Woo thing, where because I think in one of John Woo's movies, I think it was The Killer. He was like he wants to give his eyes to a blind girl or something. Because I'm not. I mean, I know it's a classic, but I'm not. Unfortunately, I confess I'm not overly familiar with it, but I seem to recall there was a line like "Give my corneas to Jenny" or something like that in the movie, and I think that's the whole thing about the liver becomes very symbolic as the film unfolds and as we get to sort of the conclusion. But yeah, the fact that they're saying, I mean, it just seems funny. I mean, if they were talking about heart or something, I don't think it would be as funny as the word liver. Right. Because he's like, I just want his liver. So it's like,
Right? He's talking about his liver hurting, which of course it's like, he's not stopping drinking. And so, the liver can only handle so much anyway. But then he's like continually drinking while he's, he's getting to this point where he's almost incapacitated, right? Like he's barely able to stand up at points.
Well, he passes out with a cigarette in his lips at one
right.
point.
That's right. And but Alexandra Camp, Dr. Forster, she
seems to think that's charming.
Right. Yeah, she takes the cigarette away from him. Yeah. I mean, part of it, I think, in her case, is she's so the other plot point that we get here with Dr. Forster, Alexandra Camp, she won, right? She's in fear of her life because this clone samurai is coming after her. But then there's the other piece, and that other piece is that so we know that he's coming after her, but then she discovers that her boss, Dr. Hiller, played by Alan Coleman, is creating his own deadly clones, his own killer clones.
There's a gap I need to fill in here.
Oh yes.
And so what they've used, they get after the first encounter, some of Takeru's blood gets onto Madsen, and so then Dr. Hillier is able to get that because that has what is referred to in the film as the obedience strain.
Right.
So this is the method of the DNA or whatever the programming, that they will be able to weave into the DNA of the clones, which will make it possible for them to follow their instructions. And this is this is like the mystery. The secret source or whatever that he's been trying to get hold of, and using that he can then move forward with his own project. So basically Dr. O was a renegade, but basically Hillier is just as bad, if not worse. So it's kind of we get one villain is gone, and then we've sort of quickly established a new villain, and Alexandra Camp is kind of the innocent amongst them, who's kind of going to be the kind of whistleblower character from this point on, where she doesn't want anything to do with it, and now she has to be protected. So it becomes a protecting the witness kind of storyline, as well as sort of tracking down so much that he's trying to get Takeru. It's more about sort of bringing them, getting Takeru to come to him because he wants the liver, and two, he's got to protect the girl.
Yeah, and I think this is where the story takes a turn that I think, again, I wasn't expecting, where there's some nuance and some complicatedness in the story, where now we get the sort of I don't know if it's like the Frankenstein element, but
yes.
Takeru.
I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah. You get Takeru where he kind of has the existential crisis, and
yes.
I think you could criticize the film for the way that they use the sort of the prostitute as the sort of the salvation, or the woman helping him find his humanity, that it seems like a common trope. It
is. But I think she plays it nicely. I think she's a really sort of sincere character. I think it works.
Well, I think
it's overly cliche.
Yeah, and the other reason why I think it works is that this movie only had 90 minutes to work with. And I think using her character that way, or having a character like that in the film, actually allowed us to move Masa Funaki, Takeru's progression, through that sort of finding his humanity much quicker. And it worked much. So it was sort of like you have this established trope of the hooker with a heart of gold, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And but it's used here in a really great way to further Takeru's character progression. So in that sense, I actually was okay with it. Like I guess you could say I forgave it, but I actually liked the way they used it here, to not bog the film down, not go through these really big scenes of Takeru, because a lot of times that's what happens with these movies, right? Is that the plot gets in the way of the action, and you just spend these huge chunks of time trying to figure out, how. You could have easily added a half hour onto the movie with this whole existential crisis piece if they hadn't just sort of taken some of these shortcuts here that I think worked.
Yeah, well, I think that's fair. Yeah, and the whole the hardened character sort of learning, getting in touch with themselves, kind of again is a very common thing, and usually there is that juxtaposition with either a love interest or a child. So there's two child, well, you can lean towards the love interest thing, I guess, but Terminator 2 and The Professional, or Leon, they both do that. They're both about, one of them's a hitman, obviously, and the other one's, a cyborg from the future. But they essentially work with those same ideas of, trying to discover their humanity. And that's what's happening with Takeru. And now I like, again, with this kind of samurai, ninja kind of motif that they're working with, he becomes a masterless samurai. He becomes a ronin because his master, who was also his kind of father figure, is gone, and he's kind of adrift. And basically the only thing he's got to latch onto is his mission. It's the same with Kurt Russell in Soldier. He has to latch onto what he's been programmed to do, and that's how he can survive. It's the only thing he knows to do, and that's what Takeru's kind of crisis is. He can't imagine himself as anything else, but she's kind of presenting an alternative, and yes, they have to sort of shortcut that kind of journey. But yeah, he is very much a Frankenstein's monster. Without there is obviously no animosity with Victor Frankenstein. His Victor Frankenstein, he never he didn't feel any animosity towards or anything, and now he's gone. So he's kind of like, if Frankenstein was just set adrift, and the whole, the father relationship kind of stuff is just sort of set to the side and sort of ignored, what would happen then? And I think other Frankenstein kind of variations have done that, but I do think it's quite nicely done. Again, they have their little, him and what's her name?
Sasha is the
Sasha,
character.
yeah.
Yeah.
So they have they meet a couple of times, I think, before. I think they have like a couple of encounters before she, and she's sort of reaching out to him. She's curious about him. And then, they very quickly kind of try to progress a love story, which is all sort of her doing. She's kind of pushing it on. So, and yeah, heavy-handed maybe, but I don't know. I think the actress as Cassandra Gray did well with what is basically a very, cliched and you could argue, fairly sexist kind of role, but they don't sex her up. She's kind of, they do present her as, quite respectably. They don't really linger on her profession in the movie. That she does have a pimp who comes around and he gets beaten up, but apart from that, they try to paint her as quite an innocent kind of character, and I think that helps as well. If she, you couldn't have like a seasoned professional, let's say, kind of, doing that. I don't think that would work as well. I think that she is young and looks quite naive and is perhaps quite lost herself. I think, and I think that works. And on the flip side of that story, we've got Sam Bottoms with a woman who's completely different, who's also from quite a different world to him, who's this scientist, Dr. Forster, played by Alexandra Camp, and his encounters with her are less about romance than a therapy session. Right. He's kind of going into, she sort of draws out his the things that haunt him, basically, and then he's sort of rambling on and stuff because and obviously with the drink and stuff, but so that she also sort of helps him get his act together, basically, as the movie sort of progresses, and there is character development for both those guys. They both go on these journeys and these women help them, and I think that the film sort of goes along at such a pace that it's there's though these scenes are the heavier scenes, they don't drag too much. I think they sort of, you might be sort of a bit tired. They might become a bit tiresome after 2 or 3, but you're never far away from the next action scene. So the I think those bits that they're perhaps the weaker parts, but not too much of a detriment. I think they still give the film its character.
Yeah, I think they know how to put these things, again, like using maybe some established tropes, but they use them in a way to move the film along, and I think the result that we get that I was not expecting. So we get we get our next confrontation between Takeru and Mitchell Madsen, where Takeru is going to kill Alexander Camp because he's like you said, he's a sort of a he's sort of got his one mission. That's all he's got, right? He's a masterless samurai.
Yeah.
And so they go to where Alexander Camp and Madsen are holed up. Takeru goes. Sasha tags along because she kind of wants to keep an eye on him. And it's interesting because now the film has shifted for us, right? Where we went from having Takeru as the mindless killer, this like killing machine, and it's like, what can Bottoms do to stop him? Right? Like,
yes.
we're completely invested in making sure that Bottoms can stop him. Suddenly that's changed so quickly in a matter of like, a matter of scenes, where now we're saying, no, I don't want Bottoms to take out this Takeru. And we're hoping that like they figure out that Takeru is not just this mindless killer. And what ends up happening is that there's a confrontation. Sasha kind of gets in the way to kind of keep Takeru from killing Sam Bottoms, I believe it is, and then also Alexandra Camp. He's about to kill her. She kind of gets in the way to stop him. Bottoms ends up shooting him with like a tracking device, and they get out of there. But that's when Camp starts to realize, oh, this mindless clone actually has some humanity to him. That's something that maybe we shouldn't just be worried about killing him and getting his liver, right? Maybe we need to think about like his humanity and how we can sort of save him or help him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's that sympathy. We do become, Takeru becomes a sympathetic character very quickly. He is introduced as this stone cold killer. He does kill like a guy. He kills the scientist at the beginning, and he's basically destroyed a family. It's a horrible thing that he's done and stuff. And I think there's I don't know if I can't remember. He has this moment sort of going back after the child comes out to see her father. And this is an actress who I believe went on to be quite successful on Nickelodeon and stuff. But this young girl is kind of looking at him, and that's that he looks at her, and he's not gonna. You're worried that he's gonna kill her, but that's when he sort of looks at her, and he doesn't feel something, but something is sort of starting to awake in him at that point. Not a regret, but something, some sort of hesitancy, let's say. And it's that which the relationship with Sasha builds on. So he becomes the sympathetic character. He makes this. He's pursuing his programmed objective, and Cassandra's kind of the fact that she gets in the way, and that happens. There's the accidental, the unfortunate event, or whatever we want to call it, related to the Harry Potter series or whatever. There's that is then again sort of quite an integral moment for Takeru, but we've still got a way to go before there's any sort of reconciliation or redemption or anything for that character. And that's going to come with the third part of the movie, which all revolves around this other element, which we touched on earlier, which was Hillia's project, or Hilla's project with Kismet.
Yeah, and so and actually it's funny because you mentioned the actress is Jeanette McCurdy, who plays the young girl in the film, went on to do, like you said, Nickelodeon work. iCarly was, I think, the most famous show that she did. But interesting enough, also we have a young Taylor Lautner who plays So when Hiller starts his cloning work, he clones a boy who's supposed to, who's going to be this killer, and the young version of him is Taylor Lautner from the Twilight films. Interesting. Both of these kids were born in 1992, and they both. It's almost, you could almost say, like, other than maybe like I would say maybe, yeah, probably other than like Williamson, they and Morita, they kind of go on to be like the biggest stars of this film, kind of after the film's done.
Yeah. So this is one of the retrospective additions, to the movies, because obviously at the time nobody knew who Taylor Lautner was.
Right.
But exactly. I remember, he's still kind of, even if he didn't know who he was, he's an impressive presence when you see him in the movie. He's this kid, doing this fast-paced martial arts stuff. And then you kind of see now, oh, that was Taylor Lautner, and that was his film debut. And then he went on to, I think it was like Shark Boy and Lava Girl and other things, and obviously became more famous with the Twilight stuff, but was still sort of a martial arts kind of action guy. And they did try to mold him into an action star at one point, but it didn't. The films weren't successful or anything. But he his skills were all there, even when he was, say, in this movie at 8 years old. I was watching a clip earlier of him on Conan O'Brien, talking about being in the movie, and they were showing a clip and stuff, and he was kind of a bit embarrassed about that was his first thing and stuff. But everything, I think people were still quite impressed with with his skills and stuff, and that's kind of one of the elements that, because of Twilight and stuff, and which I don't think he demonstrates so much. I haven't seen them. I don't think he demonstrated much of that in those movies. People don't connect so much with that side of him, whereas he, I think in his in this, and a few of the early things that they really tried to sort of lean into those skills that he had more. Obviously he didn't become a Scott Adkins or anything now, but he could have been. That could have happened. But I think we first got we have that first scene with Taylor Lautner beating up this 6 foot guy, and then what Hiller does is he accelerates the maturity. And so there's a second sort of teenage incarnation played by a guy called John Stork, who doesn't have really any other credits apart from like a reality show. And then if it's not inappropriate to mention now, the third incarnation is UFC star Bas Rutten, and he becomes the basic, what I generally term as the odd job factor he provides in the movie, because it was like you've always got like where there's a sort of a villain who's not a physical threat, as in the case of Dr. Hiller here. There's always a substitute, somebody to do the heavy lifting, and in Goldfinger that was Odd Job, and who was the guy with the taxi, the chauffeur with the hat and stuff, and he this big hulking guy who takes on James Bond. And here we've got Bas Rutten, who then has to take on who comes after basically the hero. But the in the sort of middle section here, what we've got is Hiller is using Kismet to approach Takeru to kind of spur him on. So you must complete this mission. So because he wants Dr. Forster dead because she knows too much, basically. So he's kind of not. You would think he would be wanting to stop Takeru, because Takeru is going to want to kill Hiller as next. But he doesn't see that. He sees it as like a chess game kind of thing. He's gonna maneuver his superior fighter and get him into place, and then that will be his defense, that's sort of his play basically here, and say Bas Rutten is the incarnation of that grown-up version of Kismet, which I think is pretty cool as well.
Yeah, I like that too. I think I like I like the dynamic of the story here, that again, it's not just simply this killer who this mindless killer that they've got to stop somehow. That we've changed it so now that Takeru has humanity. Now we've entered entered a new mindless killer into the story. Like you said, he has 3 different incarnations. The adult version ends up being Bas Rutten, which when we get to that fight scene, I think that's a really good one, just because, again, both of them being mixed martial artists. I think, we were still kind of in a phase where people were trying to figure out how to incorporate mixed martial arts. And I think,
I think Bas Rutten was one of the first, I think,
right,
to be brought into movies, as well as, especially in terms of UFC.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because he did a few movies around this time, and then kind of kept making. I mean, he kind of, I think what happens is he kind of does some action movies, and then he gets on with what's the guy's name? The actor, like I really can't think of his name. He's he does, like, he's a kind of a doughy guy who does comedies. Kevin James.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, was he worked with him on? Did he do like Here Comes the Boom and stuff like that?
Yeah, exactly, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Kevin James has always kind of been along that mixed martial arts group. Like I think he got into doing mixed martial arts stuff, but then he's always kind of been there, like, at the events, that kind of thing. And so I think he learned jujitsu and those things just sort of as an actor, sort of doing them. And so I think he kind of befriended some of these UFC guys. And Bas Rutten is one who's been in more of those movies. I haven't really seen those movies. I just was looking up what Bas Rutten's been doing, and I noticed that he was in, Here Comes the Boom, Mall Cop, those kinds of films.
Yeah. But he didn't really do many films around this time. He kind of did. He did Shadow Fury, and his next movie was 2 or 3 years later. I mean, IMDb credits Shadow Fury as 2001. At the end of the movie, it says it's 2002. So I think there's a slight discrepancy. But he did The Eliminator, which was the attempt on and again, quite a low budget to try and push Bas Rutten as an action lead. Yeah. And they Michael Rooker was kind of the experienced sort of name there in the movie to sort of, leverage. And that was just too small scale and just not particularly good as a movie. And then he did another sort of supporting role in the film The Vault, which was another attempt to launch another guy as an action star, which didn't pan out. And he didn't really. He did a couple of other small things, but it's really I'm having a look at his IMDb now. It's kind of the stuff with Kevin James is really what stands out. He's not really focused on a film career too much. I haven't seen much of the stuff that he's done, but I think here in this movie he works. Yeah. And apart from, he's very blinky when he's shooting a gun. His eyes are just sort of blinking all the time. But that's fair enough. But for this sort of trained sort of killer, sort of thing, he shouldn't really be blinking, because he wouldn't be really reacting that way. But so I've sort of skipped ahead there because I think Bas Rutten kind of comes in a little bit later than where we are in the story right now. I just wanted to sort of put that in context of the way that the story is progressing. Before we meet Bas Rutten, I think we've got the next the next encounter between Takeru and Takeru Madsen, where basically Takeru has had the tracker put on him, and he is told by Kismet. Sorry, not by. It wasn't by Kismet, was it? Was it by Kismet? Was it Kismet who sent him, or was it the other, or was it one of the other sort of mindless guys? I think it might not have been Kismet, actually. I'm getting confused.
I think what happens is I think Kismet is there. So it's not Kismet, right? It's another one.
No, you're right. Yes, sorry. Yeah, it's the clone that comes through. The clone tells Takeru where to go, and at that point, Kismet, the teen version, comes and interferes with what they're up to at that point. Yes, sorry. Yeah. And so that is where Takeru has been basically lured. He's after the scientist. They're in like a shack, sort of. I think they're in like his house or something at this point. Madsen has been to see Fred Williamson again. He's got a whole bunch of claymores, and he's ready to sort of, because he knows he can't fight Takeru, so basically he's setting a trap to try and blow him up when he comes near. And this is where they kind of have they have a showdown, but that showdown is complicated by Kismet making his first appearance in public, to meeting them for the first time, and that this is the point where it becomes an us against them kind of forming an uneasy alliance kind of story, like to development. The whole kind of two enemies coming together against a common, a new foe who's trying to take back. That's a really common one. I was watching White Elephant recently, another film with Michael Rooker, and that kind of that does the same thing. That kind of sets up these characters of one's a bad guy and one's a good guy, one's a bad guy, and that film also has this kind of hunt going on between two characters. In this case, it's Michael Rooker and Olga Kurilenko. And the latter part of the movie is where, again, they sort of, in the same style as this, they go back, they go back to back, and sort of to sort of team up, and the gunslinger and the samurai are sort of form that uneasy alliance, and Madsen starts to find a respect for Takeru. This is and this is the sort of crux of the final act.
Yeah, and one thing too that happens, of course, is that, right, so Takeru defeats Madsen, but he doesn't kill Madsen because Sasha, the lady of the night, who is kind of befriended and now falling in love. They're kind of forming a love connection. She tells him, no more killing. You're done killing. The problem is that when he goes to confront, so they end up tying Madsen to a post or something outside, and then he goes into Alexandra Camp, Dr. Forster, and when he goes to kill her, that's when Sasha gets in the way, and the samurai sword stabs her and she dies. So it's essentially Takeru is he sort of mourning the death of Sasha when the teen Kismet, John Stork, shows up and confronts them and starts fighting them. But that's also, I think, where Timothy Bottoms realizes, like you said, it's sort of like us against them. What is it exactly that happens? Kismet gets a grenade and sort of tries to, I don't know if he tries to get it in, like, on his pants or something like that, or hook it to it. He does. They're kind of in a clinch, Takeru and Kismet. So he uses the grenade and then he falls into a hole. Takeru grabs him and they kind of fall into a hole. Yeah. And it blows up. We think that maybe they're both dead. Actually, neither of them end up being dead.
Yeah, so they miraculously survive.
Exactly.
But I thought, didn't Sasha get stabbed in an earlier scene, or have I got? I mean, I've seen this film quite a few times, but even I'm getting confused now.
So I think she gets stabbed before, because he ends up carrying her dead body out to bury it. When they so what happens is when Bottoms and Camp get away, the tracker goes live again, and they realize, he's still alive. When they go back to rendezvous with him, he's bringing Sasha to her grave. He's carrying her back there. So I think that's what it was. I think it was like before Kismet showed up.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they end up, they clearly go into this pit.
Right.
And then somehow Kismet has managed to get out. And then a few moments later, it's like, oh no, Takeru managed to get out as well. It's like, well, there's absolutely no way that that happened. Those guys, and they are, they're clones. They're not robots, so they would have blown up. They would have had body parts flying all over the place. But that's just one of those quirks of the movie that are quite unintentionally hilarious. But I'm glad they did survive, because if they didn't, then the last act of the movie wouldn't be as fun. But that is just I think. They could have done it a bit differently or something. They just end up. it's like that scene in Mercenary for Justice, where Steven Seagal is basically in the back of a car, and then like within like a second he's managed to get out of the car and he's in a van that's driving in the opposite direction. So it's like it's a total magic trick kind of thing. That's
Exactly. Yeah, but this, like you said, though, right? Like the fact that he doesn't die, it gives us a really great ending to this film. That we get the final confrontation at Dr. Hiller's place. We're introduced to the adult Kismet, who's Baz Rutten, but also we find out that all of his mistakes that the Doctor has tried to create, that they also are there to kind of fight and sort of they have some degree of fighting despite the fact that they didn't work out. And this kind of where you get sort of the mad scientists, like old 50s or 60s movie kind of thing, where you've got the rejects or the freaks, right?
All that kind of Dr. Moreau and all that kind of thing going on.
Yeah, and so it was another great element to this film that I wasn't expecting. That just added, and of course they all were able to fight, which made for a really great fight scene at the end. Where
did you notice they're all wearing huge wigs?
Right. Yes.
You never see their faces. They're all wearing these huge wigs to kind of cover their face. I guess because they had a limited number of stuntmen or whatever, and they could just chop and change them around to make as many of the sort of deformed creatures, sort of the reject ones of the. I'm trying to think the experiments, the clones gone wrong kind of thing as they wanted. And yeah, I mean that becomes kind of a free for all kind of thing with them taking it. So they go up against they're going up against Madsen, while Takero is going up against Kismet primarily. Those are the two battles that are basically taking place in this last act.
Yeah, the other thing too, you mentioned about the wigs and the big hair, kind of reminded me of an old Japanese kind of supernatural movie, Kwaidan, that Masaki Kobayashi did. It came out in '64. I think it's a Criterion release, and so that's what I got it from Netflix a while back. But kind of those kind of ghosts, almost like this idea of like kind of the Japanese ghost character, because they had like kind of grayish, whitish faces. They were also deformed, but I think the wigs also, like, they had to sort of, again, I think it's an area where like the inspirations and the stories and the tropes that they're pulling have kind of a dual effect. And in this case, I think that the wigs had a dual effect of being able to obscure the stunt workers, so that we could have the same ones, but at the same time play on a tradition, another tradition the movie was using, that I thought worked really well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This is pulling in all those influences, and the one of the things I want to mention at this point is it really some sort of thematic similarities that I was thinking about between this and the Total Force, more specifically of the, say, Timothy Bottoms movie, because in that movie what we end up with is Timothy Bottoms' character teams up with Frank Stallone's character, who has been his nemesis until the end, where Richard Lynch basically uses, who again is another mad scientist-ish sort of character, who uses what he's called his neuralator or whatever to turn people into crazy, killers, and they're sort of fighting off like a horde of, in the same way as what they're basically doing with this is the hordes of killers sort of are unleashed, and then these two guys who are forming this uneasy alliance have to fight against them. And so with the neuralator and cloning or whatever, it's all basically variations on the same idea. But the other thing apart from that was that I was thinking, well, basically Timothy Bottoms' character as the leader of Total Force and his character and Sam Bottom's character are also quite similar, because they're both kind of alcoholic, weathered, sort of haunted. When not so much Timothy Bottom's character wasn't so much haunted, but they're both guys who were military guys who've got a drinking problem or sort. So I thought that was quite curious that they've essentially done variations on the same character, which I quite liked. But we haven't really talked much about Timothy Bottoms playing Madsen. So I just want to sort of linger on that for a moment, because he's really kind of hamming it up, and he's using all these. So he again, it's kind of this performance out of time kind of thing, because he's talking in a way that's like old, very old-fashioned, sexist. He's using words like toots and dame and stuff like that, which is just I've not really seen many action movies or anything where any character talks in the sort of overt way that his character does, and I don't know how much of that was in the script or that was Bottoms sort of going to town with trying to play this character, because in the Total Force movies they've got these kind of absurd kind of characterizations that they do with both of these brothers have done with these characters. They bring these sort of character exaggerations and sort of the way they're doing it. And but in this case, Sam Bottoms' dialogue is really cartoonish. I don't know what way is the sort of best to put it, but that kind of adds to the flavor of the movie, which is this kind of heightened reality. It's something we recognize, but it's not real, but it's kind of, it's conventional, but it's doing something that's a bit different. It's kind of going back to this kind of sort of out of time kind of thing. The Sam Bottoms could have played it like he could have played it straighter. I imagine, I was going back to thinking about the canons sort of thing earlier, but even if you got, it could have been a Robert Ginty kind of performance, but it's not. He's kind of got this particular way about him that he's doing it with the character, whereas Masu Funaki as Takeru is dead straight. There's no sort of quirks to him apart from the sort of modest humor of him having the sort of, what is this thing you call love kind of dialogue that he has, whereas Sam Bottoms is kind of really sort of hamming it up. Would you agree?
I think it's when you're comparing the Sam Bottoms to the Tim Bottoms thing.
Yeah,
it's almost like they tried to create the same character, right, in the two movies, but this movie, Shadow Fury, got it right. And who knows, like you said, like it might be that I don't want to say that Timothy Bottoms, I feel like the two of them being brothers, I don't think Timothy Bottoms wouldn't have gotten it to the same degree that Sam Bottoms did. I think the movie gave him the room to be this character that is like, there is something very Western, aging gunslinger about the character, that I think they tried for in Total Force and Absolute Force and didn't do it well. The movie had so many frenetic things going on, and it was just bouncing around to so many things. And granted, this movie was moving at a very quick pace too. It seemed like it worked better here. And again, when you're juxtaposing him to the Ronin, without masterless samurai of Takeru, they feel like kind of the two sides of the same coin, or yin and yang, maybe as this movie might have been trying to sort of demonstrate. It worked in a way that, again, it gave nuance to a movie that I was not expecting to see. And yeah, I think even just like you were saying, the dialogue and the hamming it up, he was trying to do a throwback kind of character, and it added to it. It made him a little bit more endearing, I think, but also it gave the film a level again that I wasn't expecting.
And you got to admire his delivery of lines like, "I just want your goddamn liver."
Yes, exactly. And of course, the most famous, right? The most famous is it's time to boogie.
Yeah, time to boogie. Yeah.
That's the big one.
That really just doesn't sit right, that line.
Right.
It's just like, so is it time to boogie?
Right, exactly.
This
Yeah,
is their back-to-back moment of him speaking to Takeru and saying, time to boogie, and then Takeru just deadpan says, time to boogie.
right. Exactly. Yeah, it's
But this is after the fact that this is after that, so they form they do their team up, and Takeru basically says, "You can have my liver,"
right. Yes,
and then throwing back to that earlier line, which I just quoted, he then says, "I don't want your goddamn liver. I
right.
want your help."
Yes. Yeah, that was another great, because that's when he comes back, right? After after Takeru has buried Sasha, he's kind of done, right? He's just,
Yeah.
and he's saying, no, I need you here. I need you. I need more than your liver. I need your help to solve this. To
take down
this guy down.
take down Hiller.
Yeah.
And Kismet.
Yeah, I think, using the comparison of Total Force and Absolute Force, I think, think of like a Steve Kamen movie, think of an Inga Vortsen movie with a lot of those sort of military-based movies that he would do. There was always points in those films where it just didn't work. Either the story dragged down, the characters were a little bit, and granted, yes, this movie had some, like you said, it's some kind of sexist elements where you had these sort of women supporting men kind of thing, but this movie overall, I think, as a complete movie, it kind of almost does whatever those movies were missing. Those, Steve Kamen or Inga Vortsen movies. There's always something like missing about those ones that this one wasn't missing. I don't know if that makes any sense the way I'm describing that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other thing that this one does better, obviously, is this is a film that, cliched or cheesy or whatever or not, it does have heart.
Yeah.
It's developing those characters and them having their moments, especially Takeru's journey specifically. And we didn't really get any. We don't get that in a lot of, say, we didn't get it in the Total Force and that, because basically we got some reflections on being a drunk, and that's basically it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's sort of those sort of character. Those are real sort of character moments that you might not have necessarily got. I mean, we didn't. You get a bit of, so let's sort of throw back to like Drive, for example. You get a few sort of character moments where the guys are bonding. You get and a little bit of reflection and stuff, and that's kind of what you hook on. You if you've got this kind of relationship building, you need those kind of moments, and this is not good. The characters aren't brought together until late in the game, so you've got to have them having these other interactions. Otherwise, it's just going to be Takeru on his own, and just going from one death scene to another kind of thing. You always it's just this classic storytelling convention is that you have to have them meet someone conveniently to be able to have interactions that develop them as characters. Some movies wouldn't be able to develop the character. They just kind of, they get together and they have a quick love scene or something, and that's it. Whereas these guys, Takeru does have a love scene, but obviously the relationship progresses very quickly. But I think, as say, I'm sort of harping back to something that we talked about earlier, but that all happens to develop his character, to lead us to this point at the end where Takeru has become an honorable man. Basically, he's discovered, he's realized that he can feel, that even though he's a clone, he is a real independent character, like the woman he loves believed in him to be. And now comes the heroic bloodshed of him having to stand off against Kismet, come what may. He's accepted his fate. He's just gonna let provided it gets out intact. He's gonna let Madsen have his liver, because even though Madsen said he didn't want the liver, he still wants the liver. Of course he does. So he's gonna get he wants him to have the liver. And he's going to have this one sort of last hurrah moment, and he's just going to walk towards a hail of bullets, and have this big sort of shouting. So he gets his Bruce Lee kind of moment, where his shirt rips off, and he's going to start walking up these stairs, and Kismet's shooting him. Never thinks to shoot him in the head. For some reason. but he just they're in close proximity. He just keeps shooting them, and they keep coming, and then they have their sort of final tussle. And I think it's a good fight. I think it's really well done. I think Basran and Funaki say that, like you mentioned earlier, they've both got that same background, so they can work with their skills and the particular kind of choreography that they're doing, and probably some doubling in there as well, I expect. I think there was a couple of moments where there's some sort of major sort of wire worky kind of stuff that they would have had to get doubled for. But I think, for the most part, you can't really tell too much. And is it believable that Madsen would be able to fight off, this horde of zombies, basically? I suppose essentially what we've got here. We've got these kind of martial arts zombie sort of characters coming out. I don't believe for a second that he would be able to take all those out, but he managed it. He manages it, and that's all part of the fun of the story. And then that leads us to the sort of coda of the film, really.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about the kind of the shooting and taking out the zombies, that Sam Bottoms did, and I think even throughout the film, his sort of the shooting, it did have a bit of like a John Woo kind of sort of gun fu kind of feel to it, as opposed to just like him kind of lining up and shooting. There was a little bit of flair to it that I liked as well, that I think again it added a piece to the film that I wasn't expecting for his character, who was supposed to just, like you said, kind of just be a kind of a gunslinger, a kind of a throwback to a Western period. The fact that he was using more sort of John Woo-ish techniques, I think was really cool to see.
Yeah, and I was thinking that there's other movies that have sort of done this kind of future, mixing up the past, time, sort of fantastical kind of setting. And obviously, and it's one of the films that these guys, one or two of these guys worked on. Bridge of Dragons.
Oh yes,
did that, didn't it? It was kind of, and even Cold Harvest was kind of, playing with those kind of conventions. And I think, but I don't think either of those worked as well as it, for whatever reason. But this one's not sort of over egging it with too much of the, trying to add in, things that really stand out as, this in this sort of time period that would not exist at the same time as this other thing. And, that there's a purposeful sort of, otherworldliness or, incongruity, that they don't do any of that in here. It's very, very recognizable sort of world that we're in with this, and I think maybe that's why it works better, this kind of samurai cowboy story, but set in warehouses and stuff, but not leaning too heavily on the cowboy. It's not like he's Sam Bottoms' character doesn't have a cowboy hat or anything, and I think he does does he even wear a long coat in it? Because that's kind of the. So. No, I don't think I do, because that's kind of the common thing of like if you're trying to portray a character as being this kind of sort of gunsling character, they might have them, because long coats being very popular in action movies with stemming from Blade Runner largely, they started to put a lot of long coats in, and then obviously the Matrix did it and stuff, but they don't really do that with this. He's kind of wearing, not quite Indiana Jones, but that he's sort of leaning towards that sort of style of sort of practical sort of beige kind of costume that he's got, sort of khaki pants sort of thing, not khaki pants, but and with Takeru, he's got the long black coat. He's kind of the man in black character. He looks very much kind of like a ninja-ish, a ninja or a samurai-ish kind of character, but it's nondescript enough. It's not like American Ninja where they're all wearing like really colorful outfits or anything. It's kind of very very simple, and I think that again helps with that character. Is that yes, he's sort of representing this old period, this classic era, but he's not dressed in a way that really sort of stands out as being awkward, and they haven't tried to make it like a futuristic thing where he's got like particular particular styles to the clothing or anything. It's very nondescript, and that again is always all what a part of what makes it work. And I think Masa Funaki hasn't really done anything. I've seen him in a couple of other things, but this is kind of this was the perfect role for him, and he was never going to be able to find anything to match it. I think he appeared in Godzilla Final Wars, and he definitely did a film with Roddy Piper, which was like a drama, and I think he was playing a retired, sort of, I think he was working as a chef or working in a cafe or something, and he was kind of drawn out. I think it was called Honor, the film. It wasn't very memorable.
Oh yes.
But this movie, everything about the costume, his performance, and the costume and everything all works. The juxtaposition with Sam Bottom's more not flamboyant, but more hammy or whatever you want to call it just Madsen, sort of chewing the scenery. He's more chewing the scenery. I just think it adds to the sort of dynamic of the movie. So it's not just a film that's got really fun action and got great appearances by I recognize that guy from X, familiar. Oh, I know him kind of appearances, which it's we've said all of those that it's full of, but it's just got these characters that work, and I don't know. I'm rambling on, but I think it's a really good. I think it's a really good movie, and it's also got lots of other little things to it that I particularly enjoy, like the Wilhelm scream is in there, which I always appreciate, and it's got that. You might know the location, but it's that iconic rock formation, that's famous from like Star Trek and stuff.
Yes,
that's appeared in loads of movies over the years, which actually because it became so common, people stopped using it. So it didn't appear in anything except sort of lower budget movies, like Jim Wynorski would go and film there and stuff. But for the most part, it's kind of one of those locations that nobody uses anymore because it's too familiar. But I enjoyed seeing that. So I think that's in California. I think I must have shot it in Los Angeles or somewhere around there. The buildings certainly appear to be, those kind of environments. Would you agree? Do you think it's that kind of location?
Yeah, the credits said L.A. They said Santa Clarita, which is just north of there.
Okay.
It's like L.A. metro area, Santa Clarita.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think, if you know Mark Paul Gosselaar. He grew up there. I don't think he was born there, but yeah, it's a little bit north of L.A. And then another place they mentioned that I'd never heard of before was it Agua Dulce was what it was called. And that's actually kind of north of that area. So that's where the rock area. So it's actually northeast of Santa Clarita. So like in that same area. That's where I think the rock location that you were talking about is located.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's not really a town. It's sort of, I guess, according to Wikipedia, it's a census designated area, which is in the United States we have these areas that are sort of places where you can send mail to, or places that they don't really have like any kind of town like infrastructure, with like but so it's kind of probably like most of what it is attached to Santa Clarita. But yeah, and actually I think you're talking about the Vasquez Rocks Nature area, is where that filming that you were talking about was done. Yeah. So yeah, I've never been to Santa Clarita. I have been to LA a couple times, and so yeah, I mean Santa Clarita is essentially in the metro area of LA. It's probably just north of it. I don't know though. Again, it's weird when you think of America when it comes to being north. So there is a regional rail or commuter train that connects Santa Clarita with LA. So that gives you a sense of how near it is. Because yeah, in America, it doesn't take long to get outside of the metro area to not have regional rail transportation here in the U.S. So, but yeah, that's the area. Again, I've never been there before, but yeah, I think there's probably a lot of shooting and stuff that goes on there.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things I wanted to mention was the music in the movie, because it's got, again, sort of very particular style of music. And I was thinking, the theme is quite. It made me think of Harry Manfredini's score for Jason Goes to Hell. That kind of really sort of stuck in my head. The sort of opening theme of the movie made me think of that. And yeah, I just think there's sort of a, like the theme, the sort of heroic, the moment at the end where he does his bigger. There's this sort of motif, this theme that they keep returning to, and it's sort of like a triumphant kind of thing, but it's got a very sort of a kitsch sound to it. I think they're kind of gone for music that's not particular. Again, I think more Asian, basically. I think the soundtrack's kind of got a bit of a flavor to it that's not typical to American style movies. It just sort of the soundtrack just sort of seems really self-consciously different.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean there. I think it's and the person who did the composing, Shinosuke Soromachi, didn't do anything else. It just did.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so just listed for this movie. But I think it added to the. I mean, the music is something that I kind of keyed in on almost immediately when I start the movie, because there's sort of the scene where the samurai's killing somebody, blowing them up in a car. It's like kind of a big action sequence to start the film, and the music almost gave it like a sinister element to it, where you're just like, this isn't supposed to be something awesome. This is supposed to be something that's not good that's happening here. And yeah, I think you're right that I think at points it played in on some of that tradition, that we were talking about, maybe some of the older Japanese supernatural horror films. It definitely gave the film a different vibe than sort of what you'd expect when you're seeing some big action scenes. Yeah, it's, again, just another level that I wasn't expecting to the film.
So, what are your feelings overall? Because I've seen a few. This is not a film that I've read many reviews of. I know you mentioned, say, Bulletproof Action have covered it. I know I think Ty and Brett have covered it over on Comeuppance Reviews. I don't think they were particularly enamored of it, if I recall correctly. But where do you stand on it in terms of, how familiar were you with it before we discussed it today? Are you fairly new to it, and sort of what's your evaluation?
Yeah, I think I went into it probably not. I don't know if I went into it with low expectations. I shouldn't say that, right? Because I think I think the fact that you really liked the movie gave me a sense like, okay, it's not going to be horrible, right? Because I don't think our tastes in film are that far off that if you really liked it that I would hate it. So I wasn't sure what to expect, but I think what I wasn't expecting was sort of the turns in the story. I wasn't expecting the nuance there, but then you get the really great fight scenes. Like I think the nuance and that the story elements they only do so much, right? Like if the action's not there, it's not going to work. And I think that helped it. And then the fact that it moved at a good pace, right? That it had all of this development, all this character development, but none of it got in the way of the action or the pacing of the film. This easily could have been, I think, a less capable filmmaker would have made this for 100 minutes, and it would have felt bogged down, and it would have felt draggy, and it wouldn't have worked. This definitely made. I think that part of it really helped as well. I don't know. I'm trying to think in terms of like stars or like in that level. Like for me,
Did you know that Fred? You were aware that Fred Williamson was in the movie?
I did know that because.
Were you disappointed that he wasn't in it as much as is that he's just in a couple of scenes, or was that okay for you? Or?
Again, I think I would have been if the film wasn't as good. I think I would have been disappointed if the rest of them like if they hadn't developed Bottoms and Funaki's characters the way they did. If the elements like the Frankenstein elements, the masterless Ronin elements, the Japanese horror film elements at the end, if these kinds of things, the Western elements, if they weren't developed as well, yes, I would have been like, okay, we could have used more Fred Williamson. And to be honest, I think Bulletproof, that was, as I mentioned before, that was one of their issues, was that it didn't have more Pat Morita in it. And I kind of didn't feel that way. I think, I love Fred Williamson. He's like one of my, I have him as my number 2 DTV kind of action star after Dolph, just because I love a lot of what he's done. I think he's been a huge pioneer in sort of, getting direct-to-video movies the way that we think of them now. And normally I would be upset that he's only in the movie for a little bit, but also he was fun. The little bits that he was in the movie were fun. And so, normally I would. I think if his name was blasted all over the cover, that would have probably also been an issue. I would have been like, okay, well, you're telling me there's all this Fred Williamson in the movie and he's barely in it. I think that would have been another issue for me. But I would say this doesn't feel like any kind of Fred Williamson bait and switch, or like I could have used more of him. I got enough Fred Williamson for what the rest of the movie was.
Yeah. Wow. So you mentioned something interesting about the sort of name on the cover or whatever. I don't know about in the US, but in the UK, that none of these guys' names were on the cover. Right. So it's just. I mean, it's pretty good actually. It's a pretty good cover, but it's just the Masa Funaki and holding his sword, and it says Shadow Fury, and we got a little shot of Kismet. There's no mention of Pat Morita or anything, which is I think if it was released now, that would have been a case. I think it's kind of like I kind of love how subtle the cover, the UK cover was, because it doesn't give anything away really. And then if you didn't look at the back and read the cast list, if you just put the movie on, this may have, I can't remember, it was so long ago when I rented it originally, I can't say whether I knew these guys were going to be in it. I'm sure I hadn't a clue what the film was, because there wasn't as much internet access and everything. But I probably picked this up and was pleasantly surprised, I expect, to see Fred Williamson and Pat Morita in it, and say if this ever got a re-release, you're going to see Taylor Lautner in big letters or whatever. Well, maybe not now. He's not so much of a shining star now, but they would still be trying to make something out of it. I think I'm surprised nobody did that. Nobody re-released it for that. The as a side note for that, in the UK it was released in a kind of pan and scan version. So if I watch it now, it's got the black bars on the side. Whereas I think in the US, you guys actually got a widescreen release that filled the frame.
So because there's YouTube.
There's a rip on YouTube, and I think it's in widescreen. And also, there's the UK release doesn't have credits at the beginning apart from the title, whereas I know from looking at the YouTube version that does have, like, directed by, etc. credits at the start of the movie. So there's like a whole, during that whole opening sequence, it's kind of a main title sequence effectively. But for this particular version, they just didn't have them, because they appear again at the end in both versions, I believe. So there's a repetition of the credits. So I think I don't know if there's any other slight changes between the two versions. I I presume not, that it's just some quirk that one version has the opening credits and the burned in on the screen, if you see what I mean, than the other version. But I will probably watch that. I don't know if I've watched that YouTube version, but I would really love to see it in widescreen. And it would have been even better if they'd have shot it in like full letterbox. So that would have been fantastic. But they probably didn't. They were probably low budget, shoot for the box kind of filming it for the television kind of experience. So they probably didn't do any big wide angles. They didn't have the budget for these particularly interesting locations in order to be able to do that kind of thing. So I think it's probably sort of 16:9 is kind of probably the main thing. So I don't think this particular cut, it didn't feel like it lost too much. So but I just thought it was interesting, the different versions that got released. But say, what's if you got it on like Tubi or anything over there?
No, so it's only this YouTube version, which was pulled from the Lionsgate DVD. So it is HD. It's an HD version. That's the only version that we have, unless you get it for physical media. So I was surprised, because this would be perfect for Tubi. This seems like the perfect kind of Tubi movie. But yeah, the only way in the US that you can watch this, if you don't own a copy, if you don't buy a copy of it, is through YouTube, which it's not a bad version. I think the sound was a little bit low for me. I had to kind of really crank, but part of it might be the fact that it's very hot here in Philadelphia, and we've had the air conditioning on, so maybe my ears aren't as good as they usually are. But visually, like it was okay. Like I think a lot of times when I get these rips on YouTube, I'm like, there are times where I can't even watch the movie because it's just such a poor quality version of it. Also, this one wasn't put up with ads.
If it's the same one that I found, it's the only there's only two. The person who uploaded it, there's only two uploads, and one of them's the film and one of them's the trailer.
Right. Yes.
So it's like they created the account just to upload Shadow Fury, which I think quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly correct. Yeah, it's the same, and they're both HD rips, which is nice. So yeah, I think YouTube, you really don't know what you're going to get a lot of times, and I think the fact that this person definitely put the quality in here. The only thing that it doesn't have subtitles available. That's one thing. Sometimes I like the captions, again, because of sometimes I'm here in the US and it's really hot out, and I've got
well, the DVD doesn't have any subtitles or captions or anything. There's no extras or anything. I don't know if the Lionsgate one had any extras or any subtitles or whatever, but no, pretty bare bones treatment generally. Yeah. So
okay, yeah. So I mean, this isn't it's not bad, but it would be nice if there was I think one of the things, I mean, I get the fact that there's a YouTube version, I think is good. Actually, let me take a look at the date, because that always gives you a sign. So 2018 was when this was uploaded, which that's usually a good sign that a movie is going to last for a little bit. If you see a movie on YouTube and it's only it was just uploaded a few weeks ago, it's like you better watch it now because it's going to get taken down soon. But if it's lasted 4 years, that's probably a sign that it's going to stay up for a little while.
Yeah, I generally depending on what it is, I try to watch legitimate sources as much as possible. I don't watch a lot, so I generally wouldn't watch. But I think this kind of. I've talked to various people who've got different perspectives and things like film preservation as being a justification. I kind of see that, so I kind of say So if the film's not available and somebody uploads it and stuff, then I can. And if nobody's raised any complaints, and the film's been available for, say, a few, as in the case of this, it's been available for a few years, I think that's pretty fair game. That I feel comfortable with that. But I think I'm really surprised that. Why is it not out? Why is it not on Prime? Prime has got so many things. Prime or Prime over. Over here it would be Prime that it should would be more likely to turn up on. I have seen rumblings on people, like Netflix and stuff, but I thought no, there's been no upload to Netflix at any point as far as I'm aware, and I just can't see that happening. It's not a Netflix kind of movie, but Prime or Tubi, it's really long overdue. I think this is it perfect? No, of course it's not. But it's a movie where you can have a lot of fun, laughing. You can make a drinking game where every time every time they mention the liver and stuff, you can watch the fun, the fun, lively action sequences. You can get involved in the story, and the sort of the emotional stuff to whatever extent you want to, whether you want to sort of chuckle with it or sort of be more sincere. And I think the film is trying to be sincere. Have fun with the appearances of like Taylor Lautner and stuff. I just think there's so much to enjoy within its 90-minute running time. 90-minute running time. It's just for me, it's like, I was rating it on Letterboxd from after I watched it again earlier. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but for me, it's a 5-star movie because I can just always go back to it and always enjoy it. And I just feel like I see something a little bit different, or I pick up on something every time. It's endlessly entertaining, and I've say it's been out for it's basically coming up for its 20th anniversary, basically. Right. So it just a film doesn't feel like it ages. It's just something quite. Yes, it's familiar. Okay, it's similar. You could say it's similar to things like Sonny Sheba and Roddy Piper in Resort to Kill, and or when he teamed up with Bridget Nielsen in Body Count, and all those kind of movies that were coming out of the 90s of this sort of Yakuza kind of movies that were happening. Yakuza teams up with a cop, and all that sort of. Russell Crowe did one as well back then and stuff. There's so many movies of that type, and Rush Hour and what. But this one just feels just so different. It's just got its own from it, and even though they have no money to work with, basically, I just think that's great.
Yeah, Mitch from Video Vacuum always talks about with direct-to-video movies, grading them on a curve, right? Like, if you go into Shadow Fury expecting, something like the highest level of cinema, you're going to be disappointed perhaps. But if you go in going like, okay, this movie had certain budgetary constraints, they were trying to work within a certain limit, and they're able to still produce something that's relatively high quality despite all of that. I think that's exactly kind of where I fall in as well. That like it doesn't need to be perfect, and I think for direct to video sometimes it's the attempt. And the fact that they got as much of it right as they did, I think even just talking about the sort of the East meets West trope is the right word, but the East meets West trend that was happening in the 90s. This doesn't really do it the same way, right? This really has a juxtaposition. This isn't just like, Bottoms and Takeru having like some sort of cultural thing. In fact, Takeru, there's nothing overtly culturally different about him, right? The difference is that he's this clone with sort of no personality who's got to find his humanity, and the tradition, the Eastern tradition, isn't his tradition, right? It's the film using sort of this Eastern tradition of the masterless Ronin, trying to find purpose, and I kind of like that as well. The fact that it wasn't just simply like, oh, let's do Rush Hour again, or let's do Romeo's Bleeding or whatever the movie was.
Fatal Blade with Gary Daniels.
Right, exactly.
Or Ghetto.
Yeah. Let's instead of doing that, let's do where it's the film traditions themselves that are juxtaposed, right? The samurai, the old samurai, and the Western. I almost like that better than just like let's see how different they are culturally. Oh, look at let's see what happens when Jackie Chan is offered a Twinkie or whatever, the different things that would happen in these movies. This didn't have any of that, and I kind of appreciated that too.
Yeah, they don't sort of lean into culture clash stuff too much. It's kind of quite subtle. Another thing I wanted to mention was the director Makoto Yokoyama. After this, hasn't sort of been lead director on a huge number of films, but he's been, still very successful and very involved in action in movies and TV stuff as well, I think. But there's a film called The Fable, The Killer Who Doesn't Kill, which I believe is on Netflix at the moment, and he was the action director on that movie. So I haven't seen that yet, but I think as a result of sort of revisiting this, I'm going to have to try and check that out. I've heard it's very good, or certain, at least the action is good in it, and so it's pretty good to see that he's getting those kind of projects. He also did one called Yo-Yo Girl Cop, which I remember buying in around 2006 because of him, and he was action director on that, and I wasn't so struck. I didn't find that film particularly engaging or entertaining, but I'm hoping that I'll have more luck with The Fable. He's done, so say, quite a few other things, but mainly working in over in Asia, basically. I think he's done a couple of American projects and stuff, but not a huge amount. But fun fact, he was the stunt double for the Green Ranger in Turbo, a Power Rangers movie.
I saw that.
He's stunt coordinator for a lot of Power Rangers series. So going back to mentioning, say, Isaac Florentine, who this all comes back to, this all comes back to Power Rangers. If you're an Isaac Florentine fan, and heaven knows Isaac Florentine's got this fantastic reputation with bringing these sort of action styles, but his films are less than perfect. Right. They do have their flaws. I mean, I love US SEALs too. It's amazing, but he goes completely overboard on the whooshy whooshy kind of sound effects, and it practically ruins the movie. Unfortunately, it's just, for me, he just does it too much. But there's things like that, and I think for me, as much as I love Florentine, some of the stuff that Florentine has done, including obviously bringing Scott Adkins to the fore, was I think I prefer this. I think this is a much more interesting film that is doing some of the same kind of stuff that Florentine does. So if you've seen Florentine, if you're a fan of Florentine and you haven't seen this, this is your kind of first port of call. I think now is to check this film out if you possibly can, because I really do feel passionately that it's a film that more people need to see and need to be aware of. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. I apologize, but please at least give it a go.
Yeah, I think it's the best thing. Yeah, I think the Florentine aspect of it, I think this feels like a Florentine film, but like you said, without sort of the accoutrement that we tend to see in a Florentine movie. I think of Bridge of Dragons, for example, where that one's one that my friends and I really love, but we love it kind of more as like we get a kick out of it than we think it's this fantastic movie. I don't think my friends and I would be watching Shadow Fury and sort of poking fun at it every, here and there, a bunch of, or kind of doing the Mystery Science Theater 3000 approach to it that we did with Bridge of Dragons. Not to say again that Isaac Florentine's bad. I mean, I think he has a lot of really high quality action films, and I think he's
absolutely,
he's one of the best action directors out there. I think what we see with this movie is we see that same tradition. It's almost like they come from the same place, right? With the Power Ranger movies, and working in those action realms there. And this film, I think, similar to Isaac Florentine in terms of like being able to put something together that looks really good quality on a budget, I think is definitely there. And I think you're right. I think for people that like Isaac Florentine's films, and I think it's it's him and maybe Jesse V. Johnson, I think are maybe the two big names right now for especially DTV action directing. I think
Jesse Johnson definitely. He's yeah.
Yeah, in a way, I know Florentine's, I think, had taken a little bit of a step back. So I think his wife passed away, and he I think that was when he was making Boyka. So he's listed as just producer on that as opposed to director, because I think he took a step back.
Okay.
And so I think, Jesse V. Johnson has kind of been much more prolific recently. But yeah, I think those two, I was trying to think of other names like John Hyam, I think, has done some good stuff. Dolph, you can almost put Dolph in there now, kind of with what he's been doing. But, this movie definitely feels like it's in that tradition of the Isaac Florentine stuff, but again, it's not as heavy-handed, I think, as which again, like Cold Harvest is one that I really enjoy. It's one of my favorite. I think it's one of my top 5 Gary Daniels movies. And so I really like that. I love the fight scenes between Genesee and Daniels and all of that, and that movie really works. This is like a kind of a subtler version of that. With of course, a different story than Cold Harvest was, but the future of this movie is a subtler future. The fight scenes, I mean, some of them are they look like they're definitely pulling from the Matrix, but they're also pulling from the Hong Kong wire work tradition that looks really good. And so
there's a lot of painful falls and stuff in this movie as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I agree. I think at the very least, because generally the way because I don't do like the star thing as much, because I think if I was going to do stars, I don't know if I would go the full 5 that you did, but definitely a 4 for this. But for me, I'm always like, should you watch it or not watch it? And I think this is definitely you should watch it. I think maybe the free version on YouTube is a good way to go, because you're only investing your time. And I think for some people, there are probably parts of this film that maybe people, I don't know if I would say they wouldn't like, but I think because there is a little bit more to sort of take in the sense of like kind of understanding some of the traditions that the film is trying to work in, and kind of seeing how that goes. Sometimes that would happen with Albert Pyun with his movies. I'd watch one of his movies and be like, yeah, he's really trying to work in a certain tradition. He's trying to give us like some old, 50s, 60s invasion movies and try to give it to us in a modern spin. And, you'd go into the reviews and people would be like, this movie was horrible. And I think if you're someone who doesn't want to try to, who kind of goes into a movie just like, do I like it or I don't like it? There are things that you might say, okay, maybe this is, I've seen this before, I've seen this or whatever. But if you're going into it kind of saying like, yeah, I kind of like some of these traditions that you're talking about. I like the idea of Bottoms as sort of this kind of hamming it up kind of Western type character with, with Takero's or with Funaki's character as the purposeless Ronin who's trying to kind of find his way. But doing that with like this idea of like a Frankenstein clone character, kind of merging those traditions, I just think it's such a fascinating idea. And again, I wasn't expecting it. I was not expecting to see Frankenstein mixed with masterless Ronin film traditions. I wasn't expecting that at all, and to see it pulled off the way it was, it was definitely a pleasant surprise there. I think I was expecting just a fun actioner, and I got a little bit more than that.
Excellent. There's a couple of movies I want to ask if you've seen. The stunt coordinator on this film, also he was the fight choreographer on Witness to a Kill with Gary Daniels, which was the sequel to Queen's Messenger. Yeah. Did you ever see that one?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Yeah, because that's another one that's really hard. That was never released over here in the UK, and it's quite hard to get hold of. And I did have it at one point. I'd imported it and I sold it, and I really want to get it back because I remember it was really solid. I mean, Queen's Messenger wasn't that great, but I loved the concept, and I wanted it to be a really good movie. It just didn't quite work, but Witness to a Kill had some really good action in it for because Gary Daniels, quite a fair number of his films, some of them are quite bland and generic, but some he can do the action when he's working with the right people. His movies are classic, and Witness to a Kill isn't necessarily a classic, but I think it's got some really good work in it. And on the flip side of that, he was the action director of a Japanese film called K-20, The Fiend with 20 Faces, which is kind of a Black Mask-ish kind of thing, but it's a very big blockbuster sort of adventure film, almost like an equivalent of like a Spider-Man movie or something. It's kind of got this kind of superhero kind of thing, but in a classical sort of period setting. Really good film. And say he did the action for that. So I would highly recommend both of those films that he's worked on as sort of relatives, as it were, of this and the work that appears in this, and also say Alpha Stunts if people haven't if you haven't seen Drive, you've basically got to see Drive, because that's kind of again one of the sort of starting points. That's where people groups were getting together, Power Rangers and Drive and stuff. It was all happening around that time, and we can sort of trace it back, and that still stands up as well. As obviously that's a cult. Say, I think you still have to say it's a cult because it's still not really recognized in the mainstream. But Drive, with Mark Dacascos and Kadeem Hardison, for those who are not familiar with it, I'm sure everyone is, because if you're listening to this, or if you're visiting the direct-to-video connoisseur website and stuff, and you don't know Drive, I'd be very, very surprised. But if you haven't, then that's great. So Drive and this, for me, are two films that are working in a very similar wheelhouse, but they're completely different. They're so different. Drive feels like a quite reasonably budgeted, theatrical release kind of movie, whereas this is it's a bit more of a grimy sort of grindhouse-ish kind of experience.
Yeah, Drive is one of those ones that you watch it. It's just like another Dacascos movie where you're watching, you're just like, how did this guy not get there? And you can look at it and say, like, okay, Double Dragon was a flop. It was, what was going on in that movie when you've got him as this massive martial artist, and you get Scott Wolf, who was doing a TV drama at the time as his co-star. So that one didn't work. Crying Freeman didn't get released theatrically here in the U.S. I think that would have been another one that would have been like, whoa, this guy is next level. Dacascos and Daniels, I think you can kind of put in a similar category in that sense, that like both just extreme talents who, in Daniel's case, it was Fist of the North Star that didn't make it in the U.S.
Yes,
didn't make it theatrically. There's like that sliver of like, between being Van Damme and being Gary Daniels, or being Seagal and being Mark Dacascos, that like there's that one little thing that, whether you get that break or not. Because Dacascos, when you think of Drive, it is, saying it, I don't know if it play on words, saying it's a real vehicle for Dacascos, but I think, most people, I would think most people coming to the site have seen Drive. I think Kenner, who does Movies in the Attic, I think he sent me his copy of Drive so I would review it, because I hadn't reviewed it yet in the site when I first started my site in like 07, 08. He was like, you need to do Drive. So I'm going to send you a copy of it so you can do it, because it's such a seminal piece that, like, everybody, and Witness to a Kill, kind of going back to that one, at least for U.S. Listeners, it is available on Tubi. So
cool.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like I was looking, with that one, I think the movie itself does not play out as well as this one does in terms of dialogue and
no
story, but the action. Daniels just brings. I think when I did the review, I think I said that he would have been a better Bond than Daniel Craig. I would have liked to have seen him as a James Bond. I still think he would have been a really interesting James Bond. To kind of see him sort of do that kind of part, and he doesn't really do the sophisticated character as much, I think, and maybe that's why. I guess they didn't want an unknown to play Bond. They want somebody who's slightly known, I guess.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about the probably elevated Witness to a Kill was that the director was a guy called Daryl Root, who actually did sort of have some sort of theatrical success to a degree. He did a film called Dangerous Ground with Ice Cube, which I don't know if that was. I don't think it was necessarily a big hit, but he's a very experienced pair of hands. He's still going today, working on various projects. Both, I think he works both in America and in South Africa, where he's from. But I think having him behind the camera on that film helped it, whereas I think the first one was a bit. Queen's Messenger and Witness to a Kill, that you don't have one is not a full sequel where you have to see it. It's more like you say, a James Bond film kind of thing, where you can just pick up. It's just the same character. They're just doing a different story with him, but they feel like different movies. But I'm desperate to see both of them again, because they're not easy to get hold of, and I really want to revisit that, because the potential of what that could have been is the thing that is most interesting to me, because that kind of as you say, Gary Daniels as a James Bond kind of thing is such a cool idea. And I think it was the closest we really got to. I don't know if you remember that Gary Daniels was trying to get a movie off the ground called I think it was the working title was like Union Jack or something. He was trying to go for a really British kind of hero or whatever, and even like Queen's Messenger wasn't shot in the UK or whatever. It feels like it should have been, I think. Yeah. But those movies I think were shot, say, in South Africa and wherever. But they weren't British stories. But but yeah, I'm sorry, I've gone off on a Gary Daniels tangent now. But but bringing it back to Gary Daniels, he did a film called Fatal Blade, which I think I mentioned earlier, which also did this kind of East and West, the animosity. Then there's kind of a team up thing kind of thing. But again, that's a film I want to revisit it. But it wasn't anything that sort of lingered. It kind of sort of came and went. It was fine at the time, but I felt no huge enthusiasm for it, like I did. Who knows what? Why do certain things, like Shadow Fury, get into me? Why do we connect with certain films or something? I don't know. But for some reason, this one is a film that I've hugely enjoyed the opportunity to revisit it and to discuss it with you. And I'm sure it won't be a hugely long period before I watch it again. But it's one of those things, we get so busy that we don't often get to watch the films we actually remember that we really love because we're so busy with other things or with reviewing and stuff. So to have the excuse, the opportunity to revisit it for this conversation has been a real pleasure. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, that would be a great place for us to leave it. But before we wrap up, Rich, did you want to plug the DTV Digest or anything else?
Yeah, I'll just mention, say the Shadow Fury did feature as a feature review on the DTV Digest podcast. We did it on a feature we call The Throwback. So we had a little conversation on there, not as in depth as we've had today, but each week on the show, we're kind of a weekly show, and we try and cover. We mainly cover new releases, so we're very absorbed with trying to cover films that are being physically or digitally released. Mainly digitally, because we find that the sort of modern landscape of direct-to-video movies is largely VOD based these days, as well as obviously streaming SVOD kind of stuff as well. So we kind of mix all that up. But that, again, we got that throwback as like a nice excuse to look back in time and look back at a favorite or a film we haven't seen for a while and stuff. So if you're interested in what the sort of current releases are, please come over and check us out there. We've also got Facebook and Twitter where we post what are the current successful films. So we post like a top 5, which is manually put together, where we basically go through the top 100 films in the UK, home entertainment films in the UK, and extrapolate, what are the DTV releases and establish, a chart for that, which is quite fun and quite interesting to see, how many DTV films there are actually in the market. We also post about new releases every week, including, very many that we're just unable to cover on the show. A side note is we also cover short films. We're very passionate about those, and we also have a dedicated Twitter feed for short films where we post a new short every day. We're very, it won't be too long before we've posted our 500th. So we've been going well over a year now. That is quite a job in itself for me because that's my project is. I have a lot of favorites and stuff, and I'm always looking for short films, but having the time to try and watch through short films, both new and old, to see what is worth recommending is quite demanding as well. But that's a real passion of mine, because again, we got filmmakers who are making films, a lot of martial arts stuff as well. They're working to limited, a bit like the Shadow Fury team. They're trying to make sort of showpieces and stuff, and to get to that sort of next level. And there's some really good stuff out there. But we don't just post martial arts and action. There's sci-fi and horror, a little bit occasionally a drama and a comedy and stuff. So there's something for everyone out there. And again, if you don't generally watch short films, because there's so many out there on YouTube and Vimeo and stuff, but they're not generally promoted, I would recommend seeking out a few. And I'll just name check Lee Golden over Film Combat Syndicate, because he does quite a lot of work on his website, highlighting especially the action films that people who are interested in films like Shadow Fury should definitely check out. There was films that I've never, there was like a Thundercats fan film, which was like it was actually, there's been two of them, but they were like covert, so that you didn't know they were Thundercats until the end. They were like these gritty reboot kind of approaches. And you mentioned like what would you were talking earlier about Power Rangers and like a grown up Power Rangers basically.
Yeah.
And there was a short film, which fan film essentially, starring James Van Der Beek, which was a gritty, sweary, violent take on Power Rangers, which is really worth seeing. The guy who did it's done quite a few other sort of interesting shorts, including it's called Dirty Laundry, but it's basically Thomas Jane having another go at the Punisher, but unofficially.
Oh yeah.
So that's
I
kind
have
of
seen that one. That
you
one I
have seen
have
that one,
seen.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
which was really good, because I think it kind of told me, like, it was kind of like the what if, like, okay, yeah, I shouldn't be blaming Thomas Jane for how that Punisher movie turned out. That it was, that it wasn't necessarily, he didn't have, it wasn't his decision to make it the way it was made. Thomas Jane was definitely capable of doing a really good one there. But yeah, I think, I think through the shorts, like, one thing I try to do is, if I'm on Twitter and I see that you've posted, a short film, I always kind of, I always kind of see it as a very easy way to signal boost. It's like there's so many ways to support indie that we always talk about. Like, obviously spending money is the most common way. You can buy the movie, buy a book, whatever it is that somebody's releasing. But then there's that other piece of it where sometimes it's like, it doesn't take a lot to just, if you see something, to just like and retweet it. And so, obviously I try to do it with other people's podcasts and stuff, but with the short films that you're posting, it's like, yeah, if I can maybe just retweet it out there and see if other people see it. So that's one thing too. If people are following on Twitter, there's the DTV Shorts, DTV Digest Shorts account.
Yeah, I should mention. Yeah, it's a DTV Short Shots.
Short
Shots is the account, and our main Twitter is the DTV Digest. There's no point in me plugging stuff and then not telling you what it's actually called. But so the DTV Digest, we can be found on Twitter and Facebook, and the shorts film DTV Short Shots is just on Twitter. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your support. As I say, that is really appreciated, because I get very frustrated about wanting to support short films and whatever. And yeah, as you're saying, basically in the same way of doing the kind of retweet thing, just doing those posts is kind of as much as I can do, really, to try and create awareness. And then the other thing obviously we do is we do the feature reviews, and then sometimes we do Short Shots dedicated podcasts where we just talk about short films. We've done about 15 of those, where we usually sort of focus on a genre. So we know if somebody's interested in horror, then they might tune in to listen to these. But sometimes we'll mix them up. But often it's very sort of focused on, okay, and they're usually recommendations. Here's like 4 films that you're probably going to want to see, and here we'll tell you why and stuff, and sort of go into some of the filmmakers and stuff who are involved. But so short films are a big. If I had the time or something, and I could do like a direct-to-video connoisseur or Comeuppance Reviews kind of website, it would probably be devoted to short films, if I could do it. I mean, there are some really good ones out there, and I do feed from those. I do crib recommendations and stuff from there. So there's a lot of people out there, as I say, like Lee Golden and stuff, doing a lot more than I'm able to do to support short films. So there's a lot of places you can go to find out about some stuff, and you'll find big name stars in some of these things as well. It's like Jude Law did one. I recently watched a quite funny one which had Robert Picardo, who's actually done quite a few short films and stuff. So it's not all amateurs and inexperienced. Some of the films are amateur, and they can be really very good regardless, because they're very talented people involved. But others are very, very professional productions, some of them with quite decent budgets. There was a horror one we looked at recently, which was made by Sony, because Sony has kind of decided, they've only done one to date, but they kind of established that they were going to do, rather than invest straight away in new filmmakers with like a feature film, they're going to sort of test them with a short production. So there was a short film. They launched this offshoot called Scream Gems from Screen Gems, and they did a film. I can't remember. I think it was called Blink or something like that. I'm terrible with trying to remember titles and stuff sometimes, but that was a very, very polished sort of proof of concept kind of movie. And a lot of these films that are sci-fi and stuff, they are kind of made to garner interest, in and potentially something else. And most of them don't. Most films, they can be a bit frustrating to watch because they kind of show you something, and then I was watching one with Ralph Moller turned up in one. It was like a really interesting sort of monster movie-ish kind of thing, and Ralph Moller's in it for like 2 seconds, and I was thinking, great, I want to see this movie, but you can't. It's the movie wasn't made. It possibly won't ever get made, but you get these like little tasters of what could have been and stuff. So and sometimes that's frustrating, but sometimes I'm just grateful that that's what we've got. And it's always nice to see, especially if it's like Ralph Moller. I mean, how cool is that? I mean, it's like exactly. I could never anybody who's like of that sort of generation, I guess, of sort of action actors and sort of supported by, if Sven-Ole Thorsen turned up in a short film, I'd be over the moon, or whatever, so stuff like that. But thank you for the opportunity to sort of talk about that for a bit as well. But obviously, we were mainly here to talk about Shadow Fury. And I will say for sort of one final time, thank you so much for having me on to share my love of this film.
Yeah, no, this worked out really well. I mean, I think when we were thinking about what the idea was going to be for this, for having you back on, I think this was a really great one, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm glad you recommended it to me as well. I think it was a fun one, and I think for people out there listening, I think right now it is available on YouTube. I think it's worth checking out. It's only 90 minutes, but I think it's going to give you a lot more than you're expecting. So definitely everybody check it out. But yeah, thank you again, Rich, for coming on. This was a great conversation. And yeah, everybody else, we'll be back soon with the DTV Connoisseur. Bye, everyone.
Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.